And no one would understand him. Why did you choose this hill to die on? And you'd be
And
like, they're hurting kids. And they would still go away, do like a journalist would do this. He'd interview me. Why did you choose? Why is just do this? What's going on? They're hurting kids. They're hurting kids. They're cutting the cocks off kids. You know, how the fuck are you not obsessed with it? But he also went on to say I was abusive, and that was another reason they got rid of me, which is a complete lie. And I believe is probably based on a letter I wrote where I simply said, please stop asking me to stop fighting for my daughter. And I think they, in the way that these dishonest pricks do, that was cast as abuse.
okay, so Graham Linehan, you're
Hello.
very welcome. You're very, very, very welcome. First of all, I want to say, spill about Joe Rogan. Tell us everything.
Yeah, well, it was just really great. It was a lot smaller when I went inside the studio than I imagined it would be. It's a much smaller room than I thought. Yeah. They were all very polite, very professional. He was very warm with me. And we went into the room and he just kind of immediately pressed record, And then I looked at his site and I didn't realize he does one a day. Did you know this?
I did not.
Yeah, I mean, it looks that way. I could be wrong, but I think he's probably doing one right now, or getting ready to do one today.
3 hours.
Yeah.
And what I noticed about, because you told us you were going on, and then the very next day it was released. So I realized you just sit down, he hits record, talk for 3 hours, and then the next day it's released. So there's no editing or anything.
Nope, doesn't look that way. No.
That's the magic,
probably
I think.
Light. There's probably 24 hours. There's probably a little bit of light just in case there's something that, they're given 24 hours just in case there's something.
Yeah. And I believe
and
recently, yeah, there was recently an interview that didn't go out, and I think that was on the that was a mutual decision by the guest and Joe. So, I think he records in advance just in case something goes wildly wrong. But I could tell as we were doing it, I could tell he was, not happy. Happy is the wrong word, but he was glad that someone was
spilling
all that stuff, I guess, But it's still weird for me because, like, I still have this thing in my head that, when I tell them about the eunuch archives, that as soon as I tell Joe Rogan, I'll hear sirens going past the house as they go to arrest them, and I just say, oh yeah, like 20 million listeners. And I've just said that the W path is full of child castration enthusiasts, and they link to a child pornography website. And it's like, nah, that's not we're not gonna do anything. You know what I mean? It's like still just lying around in plain view. I asked people yesterday, why hasn't that piqued everybody? The fact that there's a connection between.
I saw you ask that.
Yeah, and the answers were interesting, but they all amounted to basically most people don't know, most people don't care, most people are grossed out by it, and as a result, you have this appalling scandal just sitting around, and no one's doing a fucking thing about it, Although I know people close to the administration. I know that's crazy to say, but I do. And I believe that this month is going to see a few things that will shock some gender doctors over here. I could be wrong, but I think there might be some moves. At least, maybe it wasn't the end of the month. Maybe it's the end of the year. But I think they're about to go nuclear on all these people.
The US?
Yeah, it looks like gender, a pediatric transition. I think that's what's going to be targeted.
Oh, I think that's over. I think they're just crushing it. I think so. In America, yeah, I think they're crushing it. How it goes then, I've thought about it a lot. I think there's going to be an extraordinary push around DIY online because this is a human rights issue, and they're going to push. Yeah, DIY hormones, DIY online. Yeah.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
They're going to push in that direction,
Yeah, we just interviewed Ray Blanchard yesterday, and then we were talking about amputees, as you do, as I always do anyway. And then he was telling me about how he was invited to a conference for these people who want their legs cut off, and they were trying to build their movement so they could get access to hormones and surgeries. And then he shared this article after the fact, just because I had asked for more information, and I read it. And Anne Lawrence, that autogynephilic man who wrote Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, Anne Lawrence is quoted in this article giving tips on how to do DIY amputations in the meantime before you can get this covered on insurance and people to do it. And he's saying, use ketamine as a safe anesthetic for amateurs, and use a tourniquet. And then his advice was, but it's kind of hard to make it out to be a chainsaw accident if you've got a tourniquet in the house. And it was this insane advice. But I think you're right, Stella. I think if they go hardcore, banning it completely, it's not going to make it go away. It's going to make people do insane things like that, like self-amputation, self-harm, like self-medication, because the internet will provide all of these hormones anyway. So I'm not sure how I feel about. I'm much more interested in how we shift the culture so that people no longer think they need their penis chopped off. People no longer think that they need to pump their bodies full of wrong sex hormones, rather than the heavy-handed bans.
But this one is what confuses me, though. Like, this person was giving advice on how to cut off limbs. Nothing to do with gender dysphoria.
It's Anne Lawrence, right? You know who he is?
Yeah.
He's that
I'm
autogynephilic
not
man.
too familiar with Anne Lawrence, I have to say. No,
He's autogynephilic. He wrote Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, which is probably one of the best resources on autogynephilia. But
right.
he was invited to this conference because they had kind of succeeded in winning over public support for chopping off penises. And
it's about 25 years ago.
It's 2003, yeah. And so, but then he's giving them advice. They're trying to figure out how they can get leg amputations also socially accepted and surgeons willing to do it. And Anne Lawrence is giving them advice. In the meantime, while we're still working on this, how to get the surgeons to do this, here are some handy DIY tips on how to chop your own leg off in your house.
Now, Anne Lawrence is a doctor, a trans woman who wrote the book really on autogynephilia.
Yeah.
And is an extraordinary person. We interviewed Anne Lawrence, myself and Sasha, and it was a fairly insane interview. There's no doubt about it. And it gave a real representation of the extraordinary obsession that some people have. And, Anne Lawrence would be that person. And there's a famous trans activist in Ireland from America, and he used to operate this chopping shed in America where he was chopping people's genitals off.
Is that the unit maker?
No, that's another one. The unit, he's the Norwegian guy.
Right. Okay.
So
sorry.
This guy, he's come over, he's left behind his chopping shed in America, and he's over in Ireland now. But he's very proud of his DIY. In my back garden, I used to chop genitals off. So
he wrote a piece about it. I remember his piece about it. He's just delighted with himself.
Yeah.
One thing that keeps hitting me about this whole thing is that, I remember one of my favorite sequel books, thrillers and sequels was Silence of the Lambs and Manhunter. And now we have these fucking people openly saying, oh, here's how you can cut your legs off. It's really disturbing. I mean, I'm so used to being shocked by this, but I have all the information inside me. I carry it around. So now to hear that the fucking trans doctors helping people cut their legs off, what is going
20
on?
years
Why
ago.
is it being stopped? Why aren't people being arrested?
You're going to be at our conference in Albuquerque, and appropriately named What Just Happened. It's an extraordinary feeling of the end of days, really. That it's like, it feels like end of an empire kind of vibe, that it's so degenerate.
Yeah.
And social media has created this, and it's funny, there you are with your little teacup at Mia. Somebody said online that your conversations look like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
Yeah.
With Mia daintily drinking her tea. And we're talking about this stuff. It feels so insane.
I've spoken to you before, Stella, about this feeling of, a feeling as if, like I'm in the States now, and I wake up every day. It's Arizona, so it's hot every single time I walk outside the door. And there's a strange, it never changes. And there's a strange feeling after living in London for most of my life of, well, have I died? Is this like some sort of weird afterlife? And sometimes those kind of silly thoughts are sort of given too much weight in my mind by some of the other things we're finding out. Some of these kind of insane. It's like, I for years I'm sure it'll have a nice effect, the Rogan thing, after a while. But for years I thought they just have to hear these stories. They just have to hear these stories, and they'll act and they'll do something. But there's no they, I now realize. There's no task force or person in charge of making sure people don't cut their own legs off, because no one thought that would be a problem. No one thought that would be a thing. We need a sort of madness czar. I'd love to do that job.
What's lovely about you, Graham, is that you stayed sane in the face of all the madness, insofar as you kept on saying, like, your face so visibly was so shocked by the Anne Lawrence story, while me and you, Mia, were kind of half laughing, half kind of, "Ugh," and you were like, "What? Wait, sorry,
Yeah.
go back again, sorry." And you retained that, while I think an awful lot of people just became inured to how mad it is. And you just are still
desensitized.
blinking like, "I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe people are nodding along to this
Yeah.
crazy stuff."
And I also thought that all the people who, called me a bigot and stuff like this would be lining up to apologize and stuff like this. And we just don't live in a world where, news that I would say is pretty important, like, for instance, a website that tells people how to treat trans kids is also linking to a child pornography castration site. I thought that those facts would be like so immediately apparently awful that everyone would be like, let's get going, let's do something about this. But of course it's just not going to happen. It's just going to be the same people saying the same things and everyone else ignoring it. I've never seen anything like it, but it's the opposite to a rubbernecking at a car crash. Everyone's rubbernecking the other way, and I find it so extraordinary. I
Wow.
find it so extraordinary that one of my relatives who lives in Seattle still doesn't seem to understand what's going on, and still seems to think that bigotry is at the heart of it. And it's just like a bit of me feels, okay, I just have to give up. I have to give up trying. It's part of my life. I'm always going to talk about it, and I'm always going to, but I have to give up expecting anything to change, because it will never change. And us people who've been, so badly treated by our friends and people we trusted, we'll never get our day in court, except the one I'm in at the end of the month, where I have to stand trial. But it's done. We've got as good as we're going to get on all that, like the success is Nicola Sturgeon going, "Oh, maybe Isla Bryson's not a woman." That's success in our world, I don't know.
Well, that relative in Seattle, that's the nation of Canada. We're still there, that it's just bigotry at the heart of it, and nobody really understands it. Nobody dares look at it. But something you just said is one of the questions that one of the things I want to talk to you about is, you say in your book that the very idea that, like, if everyone has to believe that you're the victim of village gossip on a global scale, like, it's just too much for them to believe. It's too wild. It's too insane. And that's the Unic Archives, is it not? That's WPATH. That's the entire thing, the entire scandal. It's all too insane. So people just can't believe it. They can't let themselves believe it, because then they'd have to believe that, like this World Professional Association for Transgender Health links to child castration porn. They have to believe that WPATH fabricated their entire bibliography and their standards of care and everything. Like, it's too crazy to believe. Is that the problem?
Well, yeah, I think yeah, you just kind of answered it yourself. Yes, I think that is the problem. But I also think that the real problem is that you have a whole class, media class, celebrity class, who are not echoing these things. They it's like one of those rooms where you talk and the sound just dies in front of you. Nothing travels, because the media will not talk about it. The media won't, like, if this had happened, I could be wrong, but let's say this happened in 1985, right? That there was found out that this was happening. I think that would have been a news story. I think it would have been a news story for days.
I don't agree with you. I used to think that, and then I realized all the cover-ups I lived through. You know that, for example, in let's say in Ireland and England, the England were never going to speak to the terrorists. They were never going to speak to the terrorists. They were talking to the terrorists the entire 1980s. That was all a lie. All I grew up with, we'll never speak to the terrorists, while they were speaking to the terrorists. That's one thing. But also, I think weapons of mass destruction. I just think there's been so many kind of in a series that I just think it's just happening again and again. It's who are the people hiding is changing, if you follow me. I think it's hard to decipher who's censoring what, but people are censoring all over the place. And I think it was happening then.
It's the BBC thing of, it's just the most extraordinary lying by omission. You know, it's like all the newsworthy stuff, the stuff that's shocking and terrifying and really needs to get out there to the public so the public know what to expect and what they might be confronted by in some of these spaces, you know. But instead of that, it's a complete, like, you know, even, I mean, I know we go on about it, but like, you know, this guy the other day who was smearing shit on a nursery. You know, he was smearing shit on a nursery while dressing in nappies and pulling nappies out of bins. You know, just your normal LGBT personality. But like, you know, you would think, right, that a story like this, the press would be like, well, let's not associate this person with LGBT people or something. But no, it's all she this and she that. And the photograph is like this guy who looks like Fagin, you know. You know what I mean?
Well, I just watched a thing on Jimmy Savile, Graham. I just watched a thing on Jimmy Savile. And for those of you who don't know, like, this guy was a degenerate sexual, very, very dark person who was friends with royalty, certainly heralded by the BBC all the way through. And the thing, it's on Netflix. It's actually interesting. It's creepy though. It's funny. As a kid, I always found him creepy. I never liked him.
Me too.
Never liked him. Yeah.
I didn't believe the stories. I didn't believe them.
I did, insofar as creepy radar, massive with that guy, always. But the thing is, if you watch this, it's on Netflix, you'll see how many times he says, oh, I could never tell you the truth. I'd be locked up by midnight.
Yes.
You know, how many times he gave himself away, talking away to everybody. Like, you know what I mean? That was all covered up. I think we've just figured out how much is getting, I'd say that's happened cyclically.
I don't know. I mean, but my vision of the world is really disturbed by a world that doesn't react when kids are being hurt in such a way. Not just kids being hurt, but kids being hurt by perverts. Richie Tulip told me there's a sizable contingent of men who get a lot of pleasure online from persuading young boys that they should be castrated or persuading them that they should be trans. They get sexual pleasure from this, and I find it so. You know, I just find it so upsetting the way all this stuff can be out there, and the world just goes on. And you know, the thing with Savile was, I remember the rumors were flying about, and I just thought, oh no, this is just because he's a children's TV presenter. They like imagining the worst about people like that. But of course, it was true.
Did you find him creepy? Because you're a man, and us two are women. I wonder, do men miss creeps?
For me, he was just like a completely inconsequential person. He was just like one of these DJs on the BBC who I just found absurd and naff. And so I didn't really have many thoughts about him other than, you know, like, I don't really understand why he's famous or anything like that, you know. But no, I didn't pick up the vibes, you know, which should have been pretty obvious. And, you know, there were lots of people who did know and spoke about it very passionately. But the thing that, again, another thing that annoys me is this habit the UK really indulges in, which is, oh gosh, wasn't that terrible that happened? And oh,
never again.
It never happens again. And what we have at the moment, the situation we have at the moment, is a world of pound shop Jimmy Saviles who don't need to get famous because they are all connected with each other online. I've seen things of pedophiles rushing to warn other pedophiles that they're going to be the subject of stings and stuff like this. It is I've said I say it a lot, but like if you were to imagine a world in which every invested child predator was in touch with every other invested child predator, how would that world look different from this one? You know, and the answer is it wouldn't. This is that world, and I don't think people. I think people. It's so strange. I noticed as well. I don't. Did you see last year in America there was a film that came out about child trafficking, and I don't, I don't know much about the film. I don't know where the sources come from, or anything like that. But it's a film about child trafficking, and it's a thriller. And Jim Cazale was in it, I think, who's Christian. But like, there were people. The cinemas were refusing to show it. They were turning the screens off and disrupting it for the audiences. There was like this strange campaign against the film, and I don't know where it came from, but I think it was simply because it was about protecting children. I think that the very notion of that is now perceived as right wing by a lot of liberals. The very notion of protecting children, they see it as a dog whistle. They see it as a
Oh
dog
my
whistle
God.
for everything. And I find that really, really frightening. And I just think, holy shit, I can't do any more. Rogan's the last thing I can do, right? To get the word out. And after this, I just have to live as best I can in a world that seems to think there's nothing wrong with this stuff.
GenSpec's Bigger Picture conference series returns for its fourth landmark international event this September, the 27th and 28th, Saturday and Sunday, in Albuquerque in New Mexico. At this time, we're not just analysing problems, we're shaping the solution. We're looking for a way forward, and we've chosen the best speakers, the best leading thinkers of our generation to discuss how we can move the dial. With the theme Live Not by Lies, Conversation for a Culture in Crisis, this year's conference tackles one of the most urgent challenges of our time: how to speak truth in the face of conformity, confusion, and institutional pressure. As the politicisation of sex and gender continues to divide societies and derail thoughtful discourse and destroy loving and engaged families, this groundbreaking counterpoint to WPATH brings together the world's leading thinkers, clinicians, policymakers, lawyers, politicians, and psychologists to forge a path that is ethical, evidence-based, and grounded in reality. Abigail Schreier will expose the hidden consequences of bad therapy. Dr. Lisa Littmer will present her latest groundbreaking research. Lionel Shriver lays bare how society's fixation on trans identity distorts truth and undermines fundamental freedoms. Peter Boghossian will present Truth Over Lies, Bold Conversations in a Fractured Culture. Dr. Patrick Lappert will discuss the impact of trans surgery, while Dr. Quinton Van Meter will discuss the impact of hormones. Following defining events in Killarney, Ireland, in Denver, Colorado, in Lisbon, Portugal, we're now coming to Albuquerque in New Mexico. This is more than just a conference, it's a call to action. Join us for 2 days of unflinching honesty, rigorous evidence, and solution-focused collaboration. It's time to move the dial, and you need to be in the room. Visit genspec.org to secure your place.
Just for listeners who might not know you, I can't quite conceive anybody not knowing you by now. But for anybody who is wondering who's Graham Linehan, I had to laugh in the Joe Rogan comments. Loads of people said, I didn't know this guy. And now I think he's a hero.
I must read them.
Oh, the comments are lovely.
Oh, they're
really
lovely. And I
lovely.
was really heartened by how many Father Ted fans there were.
I know.
There's so many
that's
Father
so-
Ted fans. Okay, you
So
introduce
before-
yourself.
Yeah, because before, obviously, I knew Graham knew me. I knew Graham many years before, because Father Ted was absolutely. It's hard to explain the impact of Father Ted in Ireland. I know it was huge everywhere, but obviously in Ireland, it just took legs that you couldn't describe. So you're synonymous in my mind as a very well respected comedian who had gone on to great things. started with Father Ted and had gone on. I didn't know much more than that, but that's what I did. And I was busy doing the film that I did in 2018, Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk, and Graham Linehan had entered the debate. Now, I wasn't on Twitter, don't forget, so I was like, wow, that's a weird swerve. What the hell is that about? Because I only knew Father Ted, and anybody who hasn't checked it out, you've really got to check out. It's very good for the soul, Father Ted. Then you were on, as far as I remember, you telling me, and I've seen you write about it, you were kind of on a gurney in hospital, having been operated for cancer, and you said, I'm going to enter the debate. Could you tell people this? I'm very invested in this story. I'm going to tell people why before I tee you up. I just feel that you were the first who really was very, very famous to come out very strong.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time, it was 2018, if my memory serves me, and everybody was clueless. Nobody really knew what was going on. And suddenly, Graham Linehan with his 800,000 followers had joined in. And I was in the middle of doing a film of this strange secret world that I had no idea about. And I think you got vilified very correctly because trans activists said, get him and bring him down because he will. I do.
Yeah.
I think it happened to me as well, by the way. I think they later on said, get her and bring her down. I think these are very orchestrated, very, very well-made smear campaigns. Everybody on side. And I just want you to explain, if you don't mind, Graham, to everybody, because you might seem, as we all are, obsessive, but that's because you're 8 years in. At the start, you were gentle and you were just kind of saying, hey, something weird going on here.
Yeah.
And I got to know you. You were very kind when my film came out and you contacted me. And because we're both from Dublin and life is very village-like and my man knows your man, we became friends.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that you tell people that right now, if you don't mind, just how you entered and became obsessed.
Yeah, basically, I was noticing something was going on. I was noticing things like your video, of course, with the people trying to get into that meeting you were at, and I could see that women were being bullied and threatened in real life. I remember seeing a video of some crazy woman screaming, "She's a TERF, she's a TERF," at some union thing, and I kind of thought, okay, well, this is not a good. This is what you'll be facing. This, if you get into it, you'll be facing this craziness and this hostility if you say anything. So you got to be careful. So I was being very careful. I was sending out just little hints, and I remember one Irish tweeter said something like, "Linehan's a TERF." He said this, and there was all this sort of thing going on, and I was a TERF, and I was proud to be a TERF. Because it was just reality. It was just recognizing reality. But the big problem, I think, for me happened because of SSRIs, because I went into a bit of a spiral when Trump won the first time, because I was such a good little lefty, and I was believing what we now know to be a lot of incredibly freighted propaganda from the US on him, and I just thought the world was going to end. I thought, how can they let this crazy, ignorant, man with no taste and no gravitas run the country? And I was really upset by it. I had Trump derangement syndrome, they call it, and I went on SSRIs because I was feeling bleak, and then I got cancer. And I think that was another reason I was on the SSRIs, because I thought, well, I'm going to have to deal with this, so I need something to deal with all this stuff. And then what happened was I got my operation for the cancer, and I was lying on the gurney. I now realize, high out of my mind on morphine. And I kind of thought, why am I so worried about this? Why am I so worried about it? Well, this is just all obvious stuff, and people will understand. I just need to explain. And I did, and immediately it was like a blowtorch in your face. It was like one person, I mean, literally, a few minutes before, and we were sharing cute pictures, me and my wife, in the waiting room for the going in for the treatment, you know. A few minutes after I started, after I came to and started tweeting about it, I got a message saying, I wish the cancer had won. And when I read that, I thought, maybe I should stop reading these kinds of replies. So I turned off replies from people who didn't follow me. Okay. So then there proceeded to be a period of, this isn't going as bad as I thought, because I'd forgotten I turned off replies. And, you know, there's not as much pushback as I was expecting. Meanwhile, my Wikipedia was being rewritten. My reputation was just being destroyed. People were contacting friends of mine on Twitter and saying, can I ask why you follow Graham Linehan? You know, and they would soon unfollow. And I think I lost in the end about 400,000 followers. So 400,000 people were convinced that I was a bigot. But, you know, once I'm very bloody minded and very stubborn. And the fact that people were telling me to stop talking about it made me realize I was right over the target. I thought, no, this is absolutely the thing I should be doing. There's no way I should not be talking about this. You know, and I would keep coming back to the same things. They're hurting kids. They're hurting kids. And no one would understand it. Why did you choose this hill to die on? And you'd be like, they're hurting kids. And they would still go away, do like a journalist would do this. He'd interview me. Why did you choose? Why so just do this? What's good? They're hurting kids. They're hurting kids.
Oh.
They're cutting the cocks off kids. You know, how the fuck are you not obsessed with it? How are you not angry? How are you not on the streets? You know, but no, you get all these people and they just go home to middle class lives where their friends are calling their you know, nephew, you know, Beatrice, because it makes them happy, and they're all terrified. They're all terrified of the trans-identified mate in the friend circle, because they know. And my wife realized this, but I didn't realize this. But like, the big threat is not even the loss of income, although that is pretty devastating. But the big threat is loss of all social circles. You know, that's what my wife was threatened by, and that's why that's another reason why there was so much pressure on us, and why we broke up. You know, and that's the thing I think that makes this so powerful, is that the punishment for women are much stronger than they are for men. Like I could have lost my social circles; it wouldn't bother me at all, because men are quite solitary sometimes, and I was bullied in school. I've spent a lot of time on my own, so I'm used to it. I'm comfortable being on my own, you know. But I don't think women like it as much, and I think it can be actually pretty devastating to lose those kind of social circles. So Helen protected herself. My wife protected herself completely understandably. And I didn't protect myself, because I just thought, no, it's too important. They're hurting kids. You know, I really didn't think I'd spend 8 years saying they're hurting kids to people and have people not respond. Have Jimmy Mulville actually say, I don't care, in a meeting just before he canceled the Father Ted musical, you know? And I don't know. And here I am. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm now somewhere where I can write films. I'm doing a lot of work which I really enjoy, which is rewrite work. I've written a sitcom. I don't know if it'll get made. It may. I don't know how my reputation translates in Hollywood, but it hasn't stopped me from writing it, and I love writing, so I'm getting a lot of pleasure from that. And if the worst comes to worst, we can't get it made, you know, I'll just put the scripts online and let people enjoy them that way and make their own TV shows with them, you know, because we're getting to that stage where I think creativity is going to explode, you know, in good and bad ways. But I'd like to, you know, take part in that in some way. And I think one way to do it, I mean, I was thinking about this. One of the reasons we wrote the Father Ted musical was so we could give something to amateur groups that they could perform on a small scale as well as the huge scale we had planned for the West End. So we thought, we'll give them singable songs, we'll give them a new Ted and Dougal, so they won't feel they have to do impressions of the old guys, that they can bring their own. You know, we were going to reinvent Ted and Dougal for this musical. And then I thought, you know, people can go, and because they're always asking us, can we redo Speed on stage and stuff? And it's like, yeah, you can, but you're just going to do Irish impressions, and it's going to be, it's not going to be very good. So we thought, let's give them something they can really put their teeth into. And of course, now that's just gone. You know, that whole plan is gone. Those songs will never be heard except when Neil sells them to Paddington 3. But like, you know, it's a complete vandalism of a beloved pair of characters. You know, they just killed him for no reason. You know, it's a criminal, and you know, I'm my writing partner, Arthur Matthews and Paul Woodfull and all, and Neil Hannon wrote me a very nasty letter blaming me for it all. You know, blaming me for my own harassment. And how many times can you say it? How many times can you say no? Look, sorry, but the I'm not going to further damage my own name by participating in my erasure from this musical. I'm not going to do it. I've had it done too many times by things where I don't have any control. And now I have a little bit of control over this. I'm not doing it. I'm not walking away from this musical. So you either have to defend your artists like you're supposed to, or you have to, you know, not make millions of quid from this musical. And they decided, oh, we won't make millions of quid from this musical, you know. So
They wanted to go ahead with it, but they wanted you to exclude yourself, your name from it. Is that correct?
yeah. And Jimmy Mulville wanted me to pretend that I wasn't, you know, they wanted me to pretend I wasn't making any money from it and stuff like that. So I would have been secretly paid. Although Jimmy Mulville did try and pay me off. He offered me £200,000 to walk away from it. And I found out later that he tried to pay me that from my own future royalties. You know, so just a very, very nasty man. And I really hope that other artists realize that they're taking a great risk when they bring work to him, you know, bring work to Hat Trick. But he also went on to say I was abusive. And that was another reason they got rid of me, which is a complete lie. And I believe is probably based on a letter I wrote where I simply said, please stop asking me to stop fighting for my daughter. And I think they, you know, in the way that these dishonest pricks do, that was cast as abuse.
In 2018, I was following you on Twitter. I had a tiny Twitter account. I didn't use it. And I was also a good little lefty. So I had all the right opinions and everything. And I was doing my thing, minding my own business in my life. And then you started tweeting about it. I don't remember your first tweet. Do you remember what your first tweet was? What did you say?
The thing that exploded everything was I shared an article by Heather Brusco Evans, I think.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Yeah. And I
Top
said,
notch.
I said, I agree with this. And it was the most,
Yeah, she's brilliant.
yeah.
She is
And
brilliant.
as always, because it was the early days, Mia, as you remember, it was prefaced as we always did in those days with, of course, trans people need to be taken care of. You had to say that bit to get into it. And now we don't bother because it's like, oh, well, you know, those niceties don't work on these. They will still try and destroy your life, you know. But yes, so that was it, Mia.
Okay, yeah. So I'm following you. I see you saying all this stuff, and I'm a lefty, so I'm thinking, oh, it seems a bit transphobic. But I really liked you, and I loved Father Ted. I don't think Americans can probably understand how Father Ted is woven into the fabric of our lives, and so I carried on following you, and I was following Andrew Doyle and Lisa Graves. You know, God bless Toto. You were all very funny. And you were saying things that I disagreed with, but I found you really funny, and so I was still following you. And I think you made the cracks in the woke facade for me, so that December 19th, 2019, when J.K. Rowling weighed into the debate for the first time on Twitter, it was an instant, what Andrew Doyle has called an identity quake. Everything just collapsed all around me, and I went full turf basically on that day. But I think it's because I had seen what you were doing, even though I disagreed. Yeah, it was all, the seeds were planted, and I was like, yeah, this all seems a bit weird. And then JK tweeted, and I was off.
Wow, I can't be more proud that the author of the WPath files came in partly because of me. That's amazing. I'm so proud. Thank you. That's great to hear. Great to hear.
Good.
Well, you know, I'll tell you one thing about her coming in and me coming in, and what you said, Stella, about the absolute attempt to destroy me. The reason was, I think, because not despite the things we've done, but because of the things we've done. Like, for instance, the IT crowd. The IT crowd is very, very much liked by people. Yeah. But the thing about that is the nerdy people were also the first to be captured. I realized that board gaming, which is a hobby I love, that was captured very early on because there's a lot of autistic people in board gaming, you know, and I've spoken to a guy who runs a board gaming shop, and he said he's actually seen it. He's seen young guys come in, speak to older trans-identified men, and a few months later they're coming in the same style. They're still, you know, they're dressed up as women and they're identifying as trans and stuff like this. He said he would see it actually physically happening in the shop, you know. And I also heard some guy wrote to me recently, and he said he was on some sort of gaming website, and he said he saw a whole forum turned trans, a whole forum of young men turned trans.
Can I just say, it's the most obvious social contagion in all of history. We've all seen it. It's crazy that we're still denying that it's happening.
I know,
Okay,
I
sorry,
know.
continue.
Yeah, it's like a virus. It's like a kind of mind virus. I think Elon's thing of it being a
Woke mind virus.
is very
Yeah.
true. But the thing is, they also loved rolling because rolling, you know, I have to say the problem with these people is they learn to read through reading J.K. Rowling, but they only learn to read J.K. Rowling books. They didn't seem to progress much beyond that. And you have a kind of a stunted understanding of the world if you're basing your entire personality on a series of children's books. And so they particularly, I mean, gosh, the outrage at being told that their little fantasy playpen wasn't real by the woman who created, you know, the fantasies that sustained them throughout youth was must have been, you know, just so shocking. And it's why the response to her is so interesting, because the thing they're using now to pretend that she is some sort of evil witch is the cigar photograph. It's like every time now they talk about J.K. Rowling, they use that cigar photograph. It's how dare she? How dare she enjoy this? She's supposed to be suffering, you know. And I think it was similar with me. I was across too many worlds that I shared. Like I was very interested in computers. I was friends with people like Cory Doctorow, who did a very popular website called Boing Boing. You know, it just couldn't stand. It couldn't stand that someone who was part of a certain zeitgeist at a certain time could have these opinions, and so they had to destroy me. They had to destroy me. If I'd written, you know, if it was if I'd written the Harry Potter series, I'd be even in worse shape, you know. But like, luckily, I only wrote Father Ted and IT Crowd, and them being sitcoms, it's quite easy to discard me, you know. But I was still surprised that it happened. I did think, for instance, there would be so much affection for Father Ted in Ireland that I might be protected by people, but no, they all just joined in, if anything, you know.
And you thought, because you were team geek, you were team nerd, team geek. I remember reading you say that you thought that would spare you, but well, from what you're saying, it's
I didn't think it would spare me as I didn't think geeks would fall for it. I didn't realize
okay.
that they were actually the first group to fall for it, you know. And you know, when I started getting in the news for getting into trouble because of people like the one of the guys who's currently after me at the moment, you know, that just allowed the Guardian to then report it how they wanted, you know. And suddenly I was harassing a trans woman. No mention that the trans woman is a bloke who's had 3 names previously and a history of fraud and sexual offences. You know, that's still the view of me.
Yeah.
You know.
You know, the way you are in with the kind of the top-notch entertainers in the UK and Ireland, you know, the comedians, the actors and all that. Why are they so craven, do you think? I know they are worldwide. It's not particular to UK and Ireland, but it did shock me that they had so much power and they could have spoken up. Is it that
Yeah.
so many of them, I've often thought, they might have relatives or something that had trans kids, because this is a privileged set who are generally identified as trans? What was it?
Yeah, I think that's essentially it. I basically think that every Facebook group has one kid who has decided that he's going to wear black fingernail polish and pretend to be a new kind of human, right? And those parents, they're not, their friends are not going, you got to snap this kid out of it. This is crazy. This is just a road to nowhere. No, they're kind of treating the child as the parents treat the child, as a member of a sacred class. And when you have a member of a sacred class in the household, then fucking hell, the implications are huge if you say something about it. So yeah, I think it's a class thing. And I was joking about this with someone the other day. I also think that my biggest crime, in a weird way, was I betrayed the middle class code, right? Which is that we don't talk about these things so we can continue to have dinner parties, right? That's the middle class code. And I'd spent my whole life thinking, oh, I've never had racism in the UK. I've never been felt unwelcome and all this sort of stuff. And then I realized that, one of the reasons I'm being cast out is because of my Irishness, because I'm stubborn. I think there's a certain kind of down to earthness with Irish people sometimes, Tala, and it's one part of my personality. And I was being told to suppress it. And it's like, no, everyone was telling me to stop. I got identical letters from a bunch of journalists, including Helen Lewis, telling me to stop. They all were in the same WhatsApp group, and they all came at me with the same arguments. You're being a bit, I don't know, you're being a bit cruel. And it's like the cruelty to them was not using preferred pronouns, right? And it's like, this is just a middle class taboo that you guys have agreed amongst yourselves. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a taboo to use.
That's a very important point, that there was many people who thought that if I speak in the right way, with the right words, they'll all come over to our side, and they don't know that they're one of a long, long line of thousands of people who tried to say it in the right way and the right words, and they thought you were ruining things because you were saying it straight. And they were like, it's your fault, you're ruining it. If they'd be listening to me if you could zip it. And you've been proved right that no, they weren't listening to you.
And Copra Points is so nice, like he comes around all the time, or they'd say she comes around all the time, and we have lovely chats. People like Adam Buxton, for instance, he had Copra Points on. Adam Buxton has a daughter. How can you support this movement if you have a daughter? I don't get it. I just don't get it. And for me, like the thing that disappointed me most about my friends, a lot of whom have daughters, is that it's one thing not to stand up for me. I'm a big, ugly 57-year-old Irishman. It's not very lovable in many ways, but to not stand up for your daughter.
You're looking for a compliment.
I know, I promise. But if you don't stand up for I understand not standing up for me, but not standing up for your own daughter. Who are these men that I knew my whole life? Who are they? How can you not stand up for your daughter and wife? It's a funny thing, but the reason I'm divorced is because I stood up for my wife. And I was surrounded by people who wouldn't do the same thing.
And yet some people have stood up. You have, thankfully, and J.K. Rowling and Dave Chappelle and Joe Rogan. Is this going to be a new dawn of the people who did stand up? Will they, you know what I mean? I know you said there's going to be no day of reckoning. There's no, there's not going to be celebrations in the street about it. Thank you, Graham. But I think there will be maybe a new media seems to be emerging. And it seems to be there's a lot more interest in saying it straight. But I might be in my own echo chamber.
Yeah, and it's being pushed back against. There was an interview with Mark Maron, I think his name. He's an American comedian, and they do this thing that drives me insane, where they use the word trans people as if it means anything. Trans people can't get medical care, he said. And it's like, what does that mean? What do you mean by trans people? Do you mean teenage girls who have got their breasts cut off? Or do you mean middle-aged men who have no intention of getting anything done and have just worn a dress because it's the quickest way to get a divorce from their wife, Like, what do these people have in common? What do they have in common? They have nothing in common. And yet, there's this catch-all term that people like Mark Maron can use without any embarrassment, and no one knows what it means. So I think a lot of people, to answer your question, Stella, I think a lot of people are noticing these things and are just thinking, you know what? I'm just going to go on. I'm just going to do my jokes. I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm just going to, and I often compare the comedians around Rogan to the birds that peck food out of the mouths of crocodiles, like they walk in amongst the teeth, and that's what I think these comedians are like. They could be cancelled for any one of their jokes, and like there was a famous quote Jimmy Carr used to say. A comedian said to him, "The joke that will destroy my life is already out there," and that speaks to the selectivity of this, right? So basically, people can be offensive, people can go out and enjoy it, no problem at all. But let's say someone decides to have a unpopular opinion on, to pick something out of a hat, Ukraine. Well, someone can use the joke to destroy the person's life. You just have to fish it out on YouTube, put it online, and say, "Is this you? Did you say this at this time?" And suddenly that's an issue. Suddenly now it's a problem, right? Something that no one had a problem with before. But basically, comedians are so vulnerable that they can have their entire back catalogue weaponized against them, and their whole careers can end at any moment. And I think it's another reason why comedy is in such bad shape at the moment. It's nothing funny on. The same panel shows where people are avoiding talking about anything that will upset people. Comedy's in dire straits at the moment,
Maybe I misunderstood Stella's question, or this is just my view of it that might be a little too optimistic. I did put it to someone, maybe Lionel Shriver recently, and she shut it down. But are we not? I really think that we should, and I hope we are, entering the stage where if you courageously took a stand against this medical scandal and this absolutely atrocious rights movement, that should be beneficial in the next stage. People should look to people like you and the very few celebrities who did the right thing and stood up. People should look to that, and that's a sign of courage and integrity, and you should be rewarded for that. This should be your time. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, no. I mean, one of my problems is that there's a lot of goodwill out there, but it's hard for me to translate that into money. I have to keep asking people for money because I've got insane trans activists like David Paisley and this new one taking me to court. Could be wrong, but I don't think I've been out of litigation since I started. I think there's been in litigation more than I've been out of litigation in the last 8 years. And all of it is because of people like this guy Paisley, for instance. We can prove everything that he's done. He's going to get humiliated in court. But for some reason, I think his lawyers are true believers, and they're determined to destroy me, and it's going to go on for another year. Apparently, this case, So I can't get that same goodwill. That goodwill just goes into lawyers' pockets all the time. So it's I just have to.
It does right now, but I do think that there's something extraordinary happening. Specifically, I think comedians. I always thought the comedians should break it, but they're breaking it in a way that I never expected. I thought they'd break this story because it was so funny, but it's not funny at this stage. You know what I mean? Yeah. Even though, there's humor, but it's kind of awful. There's too much pain. But and when you think of the number of, let's say Andrew Doyle was a comedian and now he's a serious commentator. Constantine Kissin, Francis Foster, they were comedians, now they're serious commentators. Yeah. John Cleese entered, spoke up. Ricky Gervais is now really making some very serious points. He's a comedian. There is quite a number of them, and it's like the comedians got serious. And that's an interesting part of the history of what's happening here. And I actually do. I agree with you, Mia. I think that there's going to be an indie media. Substack has been an extraordinary kind of swerve. I see it as like the music business was dying on its feet in the 1980s and Stock Aitken Waterman was taken over. And then indie music came. And I see the same as indie journalism has come with Substack, and people are actually making money, and arguably there'll be a new way forward. Sorry, I'm ranting, but there might be, and I know you're in the middle of the trenches now, but arguably there could be a new way forward where people value authenticity.
I'm making a living from my Substack. I mean, I'm proud of that, and I'm happy that I'm doing that, without having to put my hand out to anybody. I'm actually making a fairly good living from my Substack. But I do think, to be honest with you, I think I know what you're saying, Stella, but I genuinely think that AI means Substack might not be, it might not be paying the way in a year's time, because so many people are going to go to
Wow.
multimedia approaches and stuff. I think websites are going to look different. I think everything's going to be different. And so I don't really know the only thing I know is that people like stories, and if I can figure out a good way of continuing to tell stories, I'll be okay. So my thing at the moment is I'm both working on stories, but I'm also looking ahead to see where am I going to face the next income problem, and I think it could be Substack. I think my Substack income, I wouldn't bet on that lasting forever,
Oh,
I
how
could be
depressing.
wrong. I could be wrong. But my God, AI is just so extraordinary. I don't think we can even imagine what the world's going to be like. Like, my kids are going to university. Should they? Should they go to university? Why? Right? Like, wouldn't they learn more by staying home and turning on AI? And I said, and I put this to them, and I said, I just don't know whether the money you spend on education and so on, I just don't know. With an AI world, I'm not sure whether it's worth it. The way they persuaded me was they said they just wanted to meet kids their own age.
Yeah, it'd be great crack, Dad. Shut up.
It'll be great crack. And they will have a fun time and they will make connections with people. But I think the real learning they're going to do is going to go on between their friends. And I'm hoping that there's a few good professors, but we all know how academia has been completely corrupted by this movement. But I think the most value they're going to get is working themselves, using AI to kind of explore their own ideas and bring them to life,
Yeah, Peter Boghossian was saying recently that AI is going to kill the laptop class, which is obviously that's us. We're all doomed.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
bye-bye.
and it's better like encourage your kids to learn a trade, be an electrician or a plumber or something, because AI can't take that away from us yet.
But then that's everyone's going to know how to fix their plugs and do
Yeah,
everything
see,
like that.
I don't agree with that. Well,
No?
well, everybody's telling me AI is going to take over for psychotherapy, and I'm like, yeah, from bad psychotherapists, yeah,
Sure.
good luck. The bad ones, yeah, they're out.
That is, and that's the same point about writing I often make. I often say that most films look like they're already written by AI.
Yeah.
So, those writers aren't going to be, they're the ones who will be threatened. The writers with a point of view and an actual, something to share, something of value to share, they'll do well. But
that's my point. Yeah, that's what I always say. Like, it's so soulless. AI writing is soulless.
I use it. The way I use it is I'll get something like what we've done here, a conversation that takes place for an hour, an interview or something, and then I will feed it into AI and get the first draft of a piece. And then I go over it and put it in my voice, and what it does is what's great about it is that the way when you're writing something, there's that moment where you have to find a date, for instance. So you have to go and look and Google it and all that sort of stuff. The date just goes, boom, it appears. So it's almost like a bit of legwork has been done for you.
I don't trust it though. It makes things up. It just absolutely fabricates information and studies and just makes things up. So I don't trust it at all.
No. You can't just throw yourself into the arms of AI.
No.
You have to have a kind of a back and forth with it. We're writing lots of film ideas at the moment, and you can just tell when one's AI produced, and like it just doesn't have. It's hard to explain, but you can just tell. But if you sit down and you work into the guts of an idea, and like we'll do a Zoom, we'll talk about the idea, and I will say to AI, get this idea, turn it into an outline for a film, and it will do a professionally produced outline that I would never been able to do because I don't know what the form is for all these. And you have that first draft that you can work on, but the trick is to work with it diligently and carefully so that you lose the AI-ness. You try and put some humanity into it.
That's a nice phrase. We're coming up towards the end, and I'm thrilled you're coming to our conference and you're going to speak in Albuquerque at the Janspec conference. So
if I'm not in jail
will all
in
be
the UK,
there. If you're not in jail,
yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'd like, just before we finish, you to tell the American listeners, how different is it now that you've moved? You've moved from the UK, you're Irish originally, you moved from the UK, which was your home for so long, and you moved to America. It felt like a really important move. It felt like almost historic, because you were basically, you feel almost hounded out by trans activism. Is that right? Or, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Just give us a little bit about that. Yeah.
and not so much trans activists, but the whole of British society. At the moment, we have UK police basically acting as a goon squad for a bunch of petty criminals who have started to wear dresses and found that they have almost like magical wizardry powers over the police forces in the UK. So you get to a point where you realize, if something happens, like let's say someone attacks me on the street or something like that, I can't be sure the police will take my side, you know. So and even like with this judge thing coming up, this court thing I have coming up. I mean, we have enough evidence to bury this guy, so I'm hoping it will turn out well. But you never know; you might have a judge whose kid is part of this, and who's been getting those lectures from a 16-year-old that they don't understand, but they nod along and think they're doing the right thing. And you know, who knows? I might get someone like that, and that might affect the outcome of the case. So I find the UK, and also, you know, I can't get. All my friends betrayed me. You know, without wanting to sound too dramatic, it's true. They didn't stand up for me. They didn't fight for me. The whole place just stinks for me now. And I was in London recently, and one of the things about London is the grime. It's like an ever present thing in London. It's a grimy city, and I was traveling through it, and I thought, that's all there is now. That's all I see is the grime. London for me is just grime, and very unfriendly. Not like a happy place. Lots of bad memories. So yeah, so just came over here,
And
and
does it feel freer in
you
society, in
know,
the shop, in the cafe? Does it
oh,
feel less
absolutely.
woke?
And no one here holds any truck with that crap. You know, it's like over here, it's like a kind of thing that kids do, and that's it. It's like a youth
Mm.
culture, which would be great if it was just a youth culture. But you know, the stuff about kids, transitioning kids and stuff, and the stuff about women's rights. Fucking hell, I'd like you to see. I'd like you to try and get that stuff past some women here. You know, I mean, they don't know about it, but if they did, they'd be fucking. You know, they'd be fierce. And I'm sure you agree that. One thing we found recently is that Americans coming into this has been a great boost. They've done so much with the detransitioners, and you know, they're achieving so much that I feel it's even more of a reason to be here. You know, it's a good it's a good place, and I found it really hilarious when Stuart Lee said he was scared to come to America because he thought he might get arrested. The only people who'd be scared to come to America at the moment are people who are lying. You know, because liars don't do well over here. You know, not as well as they do in the UK at the moment. Anyway, sorry, I'm keeping you longer than I should. But thank you so much for speaking to me. It's always great to talk
Thank
to
you
you.
very
And
much.
Thank you. It was lovely.